Hi, I'm SynthDad. In today's video, I'm going to explain the Benispheres Suite for Ornament and Crime. What is Benispheres? It's an open source port of the Hemispheres Suite, which adds even more functionality to the Ornament and Crime module. In this video, I'm going to explain how you install it, how we use Benispheres, and we're going to explore the applets and then make some music along the way. As always, if you have any questions or comments, or if anything's not clear in the video, do leave me a comment down below. I try to reply to all of them. Now let's do a quick tour of the case that I'm going to use for today's video. I have two Ornament and Crimes here, both of which have Benispheres installed on them because I actually want to use two sets of applets at the same time. So I'm going to be showing you some of the features it has on both of these. My voices today are a Bacillus iteratus alter from Noise Engineering, which I'll be using as a drum module. And I have a Bastel Pizza, which is kind of really my favorite oscillator at the moment. It's a very, very good take on the classic FM oscillator with a lot of sweet spots in it. The audio from the Pizza goes through the Akari filter. The two of those are a wonderful pairing. One of the things that I found with the Ornament and Crime is that it's very hard to actually get manual control because you've only got these two knobs. So adding external modulation using something like the Lapsus Os is a really smart idea. Finally, in the middle here, I have a Zeok Zadar, which I'm going to be using for generating envelopes. For example, we're going to use it to trigger the VCA envelope over here, and we're going to also be using it to modulate some of the parameters on the oscillator. I'll include a link to the installation location to get the firmware file down below. You need to use a program called the Teensy Loader, which will install the firmware file over a USB cable onto your Ornament and Crime. Go watch the other video that I link up above, and it will show you how to use Teensy and install firmware on your Ornament and Crime. You get Benispheres from GitHub, and if you just go to this URL here, you'll see that this is where the repository is. And if you click on the wiki link, that gives you the documentation for the apps, though most of them are based off existing modules, so it's actually fairly straightforward to watch YouTube videos for those. Finally, click on the releases link here, and that will take you to the location to download the firmware file. You'll want the 1.3.hex file. If your Ornament and Crime is inverted, so the screen is on the bottom and the jacks are on the top, get the flipped version of the file. All that does is makes the screen go upside down. Once you've got the firmware downloaded, you can follow the procedure I showed in my previous video to install it just like you would if it was the Hemispheres firmware. The first patch I want to play around with is using the Stairs applet. Now, Stairs comes from the TB3PO suite, which Benispheres is built on top of, but I haven't covered it in a previous video, and it's actually well worth using if you want to have a predictable LFO. Stairs is based on the Noise Engineering Klep Diaz, and the Klep Diaz is a stepped LFO generator, so it generates sequences of voltages in response to a clock. I'm going to load Stairs into both of the hemispheres here because I want to show you a few tricks you can use it for. What I'm going to do is just patch in a very simple kick drum pattern out of the channel A on my steppy there. Now what I've done is I've set the number of steps to go up to be 8, which means it'll take 8 clock ticks to go from 0 to 5 volts, which means the attack parameter is slowly going to move to all the way over here, which generates much more of a kick sound. Let's take a listen. Of course, if I want those hi-hats to be on a different division, I could just change this to be, say, every 5. I'll get a very unpredictable type of rhythm from my hats. Let's just change it back to 8. One of the things that's kind of fun, though, is we can forward the clock between the two hemispheres here. So if I long press the F knob, you see the little alarm clock symbol appears just here. Now, the same clock is sent to both sides, so I could set that second Stairs to have a different division, and I'm going to use that to modulate something else over here. Now I've patched the second Stairs output into the fold input here on BIA, and I've also set this to be 18 steps and to go up and down, so we're going to get a very interesting sound. You see, as it goes up, we're getting more of that fold sound. What about the other output from Stairs? What can we do with that? It turns out that this generates a trigger every time the cycle has finished. So you can use that, for example, to trigger something else. Let's use that to trigger an envelope out of Zadar here, which I'm going to use to modulate, say, decay. So if I patch this now into the decay input, we're kind of getting a little tight here, you'll see the envelope getting triggered. Just going to Of course, I can also use the output of this steps here to modulate that parameter. And one of the nice things about the Zadar is how easy it is to modulate the different parameters on it. So I've just set the assign input up here on the Zadar by pressing menu. I'm going to set envelope A. The assignment is to warp it ever so slightly. So now you can actually see the effect of those steps going up and down as this envelope modulates across the screen, simply because of this voltage going from 0 to 5 volts and back down. Next, I want to show you another app that we can play with, and I'm going to unpatch all of this because instead of using Steppy to trigger the drums on the BIA, go here and we'll navigate to DrumMap. There it is. Now, what is DrumMap? It is a port of Mutable Instruments Grids. Now, if you know Mutable Instruments, you know that the source code for all of their modules, bar a few, are available on an open source repository. So it's possible to run them on other forms of module, such as the processor in this Ornament and Crime. There's a lot going on the screen here for DrumMap. So let's just do a quick tour. We have two outputs, A and B here. Those can be mapped to kick drum, hi-hat, or snare. So 3 different parts, and you can choose 2 of them in DrumMap. Next, you have the fill amounts, and these correspond to the fill in the Mutable Instruments Grids module itself. The X and Y parameters navigate through different maps of drum rhythms. One of the lovely things about grids is it's captured all of the most common rhythms from around the world, and you can just scan through different tables of rhythms using X and Y. Finally, you can assign these to be CV controlled. So whether it's the filled amount, the X and Y parameters, or the fill amount for A plus the chaos amount, you can put that under CV control, which is where this really shines when you do that. We'll go back to the BIA over here. We'll take the output from here and we'll patch it into our trigger. And I'm going to turn off clock forwarding. And now when I hit play, you can hear the kick drum firing away. And if I turn up the fill on channel A, you'll hear how much more frequently it kicks. Let's put the fill amounts under CV control. And I'm just going to patch the output of this slider here on Lapsus Os. A really fantastic module to have if you're planning on really kind of playing your patches. Having something like this is just so critical because it allows you to really get hands-on control. So I can do the same thing with both of the outputs here on Lapsus, patch them into these 2 CV inputs. Now I can change things around a little bit by patching the hat output here, output B, into the trigger for my envelope, and the envelope I've chosen here is kind of a curved upward shape. And I'm going to patch the output of this into the attack input here on BIA with the attack knob set to about 11 o'clock. Now I get, as you can see, I can get this nice kind of high, crunchy hi-hat sound being triggered. I can bring in and out the degree of fill of how often the drum tracks are triggered, and then I can go back around here and I can change the frequency of those triggers. Now you hear the rhythm has changed. Now I want to bring in a melodic element to go with our rhythmic patterns we're getting out of BIA here, and for that we're going to use pizza. But for now, we're going to just start with a very simple melodic sequence. And I'm going to load up the Shredder app here into the right hemisphere of my Ornament and Crime. Shredder is a copy of Mimetic Digitalis, so it derives from the behavior of the classic Noise Engineering 16-step sequencer module. Let's just take a quick tour of the display here for Shredder. You have 2 channels of output, channel 1 and 2, which in this case are on the C and the D output of my right hemisphere here. For each channel, if you press the button, you cycle between the parameters as usual. On channel 1, I can set the range of voltage generated. So +5 means it's from 0 to 5 volts. If I go the other direction, if I keep going, I get plus and minus 1. So I can get bipolar, +-2. The other thing that Shredder adds over Mimetic Digitalis is a quantiser. And you can choose whether you want to have each channel quantized or just channel 1 or both of them. And I'm going to just change channel 1 to be quantized because I want to use channel 2 as a rhythmic modulation source. And finally, the last parameter here is the scale. So I'm just going to set that to Mixolydian. And now when I send the clock in here by just clock forwarding, you'll see the grid animates as Shredder generates the notes. If you double tap the knob very quickly, you'll see an animation there, and it's re-randomized the notes into this scale using the range that you've set here. So if I just want to go, say, 1 octave up and down, do that, and it'll re-randomize the notes. Okay, we're going to generate a patch here into voltage, goes into pizza. Now I'm going to patch up an envelope out of ZR to go into the VCA on a Kari. So we'll just take the output of the B sequencer here on Steppy. We're going to patch it into there, and I'm going to take one here to trigger. See if I can do this neatly. Into trigger D, and I will patch the output of envelope D here into the VCA. I had some feedback on previous videos that my cables were obscuring the module, so I've invested in some tendrils. They're both a blessing and a curse. Now I've muted the kick and I've loaded in an interesting envelope shape here on ZR, so when I hit play, I can double click here. Now we hear a different melody because I've randomized it. And if I change it to +2, you can hear the notes now are up and down an octave. Now let's use the second output to modulate a few of the parameters here on pizza. One of the things that's great fun to modulate is the shape. You get huge differences in the sound you get out of it. So let's patch in output number 2 here and set that to be 3 volt range. And I'll bring that drum back in. Of course, we're not done modulating yet. We know we have stairs, so let's go back over to our second Ornament and Crime here, and we will load up 2 instances of stairs on both of the hemispheres. I'm just going to take the output of the clock into the first stairs, and I'll dial that up to be, say, 12 steps bidirectional. What I want to do now is modulate the FM on the pizza. So I'm going to put that into the FM index input here. And I can take a divided clock, say, out of output C here on Steppy. And I can send that into my second stairs, and I can send that to, say, again, 14 ramping up steps. And I'm going to use that to modulate my filter. And this time I'm going to patch the output B here of that right hemisphere. And I'm going to patch it into the resonance. We'll see what happens. Ooh, bit too much there. Speed up the envelope follower. Now, unfortunately, you can't save the melodies you generate out of Shredder. I wish you could. You can, of course, save the state here by long pressing this right button and then long pressing again on the menu, and that will save the state of the apps. But it's not like you can curate a library of 16-step sequences. That would be a fantastic thing to add, but I do think that the Ornament and Crime is running out of memory already with all of these apps in it. Now I want to show you 2 of my absolute favorite applets on the Benispheres Suite, and they are ProbDiv and ProbMeloD. ProbDiv is a probabilistic trigger generator, and ProbMeloD is a probabilistic melody generator. I'm going to patch out all of the cables we had on our previous patch so that everything is starting clean. We still have our BIA here, and I'm just going to have that in kick drum mode. Let's start with the ProbDiv applet. How do we read the display? You see here we have 4 lines with 4 sliders. which can be controlled using the knob. Each of these represents a clock divider. So divided by 1 is just the straight clock passed through. Divided by 2 is the clock divided into 2, into 4, and into 8. The position of the slider represents the relative frequency that clock divider will be selected. So think of ProbDiv as 4 clock dividers, and you are randomly choosing between them based on the probabilities you set on these sliders. So now let's see it in operation by patching the output of the clock divider, output A here, into my envelope trigger. And that's not very special, we're just getting the same clock. Now I'm going to dial up the divide by 2 slider. You'll notice every so often the cursor moves down to the divide by 2 line, and all of a sudden I'm getting a very different rhythm, because I'm now dividing the clock by 2 occasionally, and now by 4, and occasionally by 8, but I'll just turn those off for now, and say I could turn off the divide by 2. Both the sliders are in the same position. There's a 50-50 chance that one or the other will be chosen. If that's like this, so it's about halfway, there's a twice as likely chance of the divide by 1 clock being chosen as the divide by 4. ProbDiv is interesting if you just want to generate drums, but where it becomes really fun is when you combine it with ProbMeloD. ProbMeloD is a probabilistic melody generator. Using the knob here, we can navigate between different parameters. Starting at the top left, if they're both on 1-1, that means you're in octave 1 and only one note will be generated. And this goes up in semitones, so now I'm on octave 1 and 12 semitones. In other words, all 12 notes in the scale will be generated, and then we go up to octave 2 and so on. That will be 5 octaves, including 5 notes of that 5th octave. Let's just go back down to 112 here. Now, the best way to understand ProbMeloD is to actually patch it into an oscillator. So let's go ahead and patch the output of it into the volt per octave input of pizza. When you hit play, the clock is forwarded from the ProbDiv side and automatically detects that ProbDiv is running there. So the triggers that are being generated by ProbDiv are picked up by ProbMeloD. It will play different notes that you've defined on this scale by using these little cursors here. And when you press on the cursor, you're able to edit this tiny, tiny, tiny slider. Now, it is really tiny, so you might need a magnifying glass. But the relative height of that slider is the relative probability that that note in the scale will be generated. So say I wanted to go through. It's tough sometimes to know where you are. You have to look for that little tiny flashing cursor under or above each note on the keyboard. I'm sure by the time this video comes out, there'll be some improvements to this firmware that will actually improve the readability of the display. So I can change the scale and the notes being generated. Now, it's really awkward to go in and have to change those by hand. So what I recommend you do is you put them under some CV control. I'm going to patch the output here of Lapsus. Again, we'll use our faders, but this time we're using Lapsus in unipolar mode. And these 2 inputs here control the upper and lower ranges. One of the other things we can do with ProbDiv is use the second output here. This generates a trigger whenever the divided by 1 clock is skipped. So I can send that into an envelope here, say on envelope channel B on Zadar, and use that to modulate something, like, for example, the shape. That will create an interesting rhythmic modulation, which will be both tight to the clock, but somewhat unpredictable. Let's take a look. One fun little applet that's included in Benispheres is called BugCrack, and you can use BugCrack as a drum machine. Each of the 2 little pieces in BugCrack generate a kick and kind of a snare or hat sound. And I really enjoy the user interface here. The little spiders change shape and size by cycling through different parameters. So the punch parameter, and here I am on the drop. Not exactly the world's most obvious user interface, but I gotta say, top marks for creativity on this one. Now I've muted the sound from the BIA and also from Pizza, so let's just take a listen to what BugCrack sounds like. You know, it's actually pretty good. You know, if you just want a quick kick drum and a snappy hat. I can change up the tone of the kick drum. Give it a bit more decay. Well, I like that. There's a bit of punch here. That's the decay. Yeah, that's really good, isn't it? Yeah, so like very impressive sound coming out of what would otherwise be just a module for generating CV. Let's combine that in with the BIA. Well, that gives you a general idea of what you can do with Benispheres. There's a lot packed into this update onto the Ornament and Crime, and I know the author of Benispheres is working hard in the background to add more functionality. As always, I hope you found today's video useful, and by all means leave me any questions or comments down below about things that you want to see me cover on the channel or questions you might have about today's video. Thanks very much for watching.